part of the Christmas season, and we're reading a scripture from the book of Esther. But I believe that this has a lesson for us today about love, about the courage to love and courageous love. And so I decided to go a little bit off lectionary today. Reading now from Esther chapter 4, verses 1 through 17. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went through the city, wailing with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province, wherever the king's command and his decree came, there was a great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and most of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai, so that he might take off his sackcloth. But he would not accept the clothes. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what was happening and why. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city, in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther, explain it to her, and charge her to go to the king to make supplication to him and entreat him for her people. Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a message for Mordecai. All of the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law. All alike are to be put to death. Only if the king holds out the golden scepter to someone may that person live. I myself have not been called to come into the king for 30 days. When they told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter. But you and your family, your father's family will perish. Who knows, perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this." Then Esther said in reply to Mordecai, "Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my maids will also fast as you do. After that I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Here is the reading. Let us pray. Holy and loving God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, my strength and my Redeemer. Well, Esther was an orphan, actually, and she had gone to stay with her cousin Mordecai after her parents died. Mordecai took her in and made her his daughter, and she felt at home. The king had grown into a crisis for himself. His current queen, Queen Vashti, and he were not getting along too well. And he decided to replace the queen. And she protested, of course, but he was the one who overruled her and took her out of the queenship. And so he holds a contest, a competition, a beauty competition throughout his kingdom. And he calls all the young women to his palace to compete for this new queenship. And Esther is one of these young ladies, beautiful young lady, who Mordecai convinces to go into the competition. And lo and behold, the king notices Esther. And she is, during this period of time, trained to be a lady in trained in all the manners and the behaviors of one who would be queen. And lo and behold, the king chooses her to be queen. And she receives her servants in several rooms within the palace to be queen. And Mordecai and the community are elated that she has done this. But she did not tell anybody that she was Jewish. And so the king did not know, and the king's men did not know. And Mordecai decided to keep it that way. He thought that would be best for all of the people involved. And so Esther wins the competition, and sometime later, Mordecai, who works at the king's gate, he's a gatekeeper, overhears some men plotting to kill the king. And he tells Esther about this plot. And she tells the king that this is about to happen. And the king investigates and finds out that it's true, and he punishes those who were plotting to kill him. But he does not reward Mordecai at this time. He seems to forget that Mordecai had helped him, had saved his life. And he puts it in the back of his memory somehow. And as time goes on, a prince named Haman comes into power, and he is a man who watches over all of the king's servants and the gate and all of the different people who serve the king. And Haman expects people to bow as he comes into the gate. But Mordecai doesn't bow. And he finds out about this through the guards, the other guards, who have been bowing. And the bowing that they're doing is the kind of bowing that goes all the way to the ground with your face in the dirt. And they're a little bit jealous of Mordecai that he doesn't have to do this. And they tell the king, and it gets blown out of proportion to some extent, because Haman decides that to punish Mordecai for not bowing down to him, that he will kill all the Jews in the empire. And he will convince the king to kill all the Jews within the kingdom. And he does this over time, and the king gives him his ring as a symbol of his authority, and he pays off the soldiers to go out into the kingdom to do this. And as we enter the story where we read this morning, they begin to go into sackcloth and ashes to protest this great punishment for all of the Jews. And this is over the entire kingdom. And of course, Mordecai also joins them. His point is that no one should bow to any man, but only to God. And of course, Esther is one of those books of the Bible where God is never mentioned. We're not sure why. They may have taken the word God out of the book at some point for whatever reason, but we can assume that the Jewish people were a people of God even at this time. So you can sort of behind the scenes kind of add God's name to this. That somehow God is watching over them and Mordecai and Esther. That he has actually chosen her to be where she is at the point in time this is occurring. But Mordecai goes out in front of the gate and begins to cry and to protest in his sackcloth. And Esther notices that he hasn't been coming by her window very recently, for a while, and she wonders why. And she sends her servant out to find out why. And Mordecai responds that he doesn't need any clothes. He needs her help. He needs her to stand up for her people. And he mentions in some way that God has placed her in this place for just such a time as this. A sort of an idea that there's some kind of destiny, some kind of plan that God has. And at first Esther rejects this idea. She's a little bit shy, like anyone would be, in this male-dominated world that they live in. After all, this is the king of Persia, a man of great power over her life. Dare she go to the king when the king doesn't request her to be there? And what if the king doesn't hold out his scepter to her to forgive her for coming? So she asked Mordecai and the others to pray for her and to fast for her for 3 days and 3 nights. And to pray that the Lord would touch the king and allow him to receive her. And they pray, and she prays, and her servants pray with her. And after 3 days, she indeed says to Mordecai, I'm going up. If I perish, I perish, but I'm going up to see the king. And she does. And the king does, in fact, offer his scepter to her. But instead of telling him the whole story, Esther simply invites the king and Haman to a party that she's going to throw the next evening. And the king is excited about this and tells Haman, and Haman's somewhat excited about this too. But Haman also has this sort of devil in his heart. And he's built a gallows for Mordecai. He's looking forward to hanging Mordecai. And he doesn't receive the message as well as he could have, but he receives it in a vain sort of way. That somehow, he has the honor, he's going to be honored at this party. And he doesn't know that Esther is Jewish. And that evening before the party, the king has a dream. And he can't sleep, and so he goes and looks into the records, and he remembers that Mordecai had saved his life. And so he calls Haman to him, and he explains, well, Haman, what would you do? What would you have me do to honor a person who has saved my life? He doesn't mention Mordecai by name. What would you do to honor such a person? And Haman says, well, put on him the crown. Put on him your scepter. Let him ride your horse through the streets. And send one of the princes out in front to proclaim how great a person this man is. And he goes through all this elaborate description of what to do to honor this person. And then the king tells Haman that it's Mordecai that he wants to honor. And you can imagine the emotions that go through Haman's body as he hears this. For he has been chosen to be the one to go through the streets and proclaim how great Mordecai is. And so he doesn't disobey the king, but he does so reluctantly, and he does go through the streets, and he does honor Mordecai in the way that he had described that he should be honored. The tables are turned on Haman, and his emotions must have been high and dramatic. For after the event, the Bible says that he went home in shame, humiliation, that he hid himself in his head from all people being able to see him. Sometimes that's the way it is, I think. The tables get turned on us when we seek too much to be within ourselves, to promote ourselves too much above the Christ child or above the community or above anybody else. But this is what Haman felt. And then he forgets to go to the party. Esther's party occurs, and he's not there. And so the king sends a messenger for Haman to go and get him.